Wonderful. Good afternoon, folks. It is Tuesday, May 6th. We are in the House General Housing Committee, and we will be talking about S-125 and applicant workers' compensation and collective bargaining rights. So it's been about a week since we talked about this bill. Sophie has been nice enough to make sure we had all the drafted language, which has been printed out and is on your desk, along with a memo that we has just finished up. And Sophie, we have her for the next 30 minutes. We'll go through the amendments that she has, and if we could just chat about the memo, and then we can have the next one.
I have permission to,
Oh, thank you. You gotta ask about it or not one. Not my pay grade.
so I thought it might be helpful just to share a summary of just what's in the proposed strike all amendment. There's one typo on the back, which I've handwritten the change on, so I just noticed it. So the proposed strike all amendment deletes the first 4 sections. Those were the workers' compensation sections that the House Committee on Economic Development, Commerce and Economic Development have added into 117. And then section 5 is the same section that you have reviewed before. That is the one that would allow judiciary supervisors to organize and bargain collectively. And I can come back to that one if that would be helpful. And then sections, 5B was originally was the certified payroll under state construction projects, which has been deleted. And then 5A and these other new sections, 5C, 5D, it extends the showing of interest required to decertify a union beyond SELRA, which is the State Employee Labor Relations Act, which was in the original bill that came over from the Senate, and expands that to the other 6 labor relations acts that we have here in Vermont. There is one additional change, if that's the direction the committee wants to go in, that would need to be added in, which is section 5E, which is under the State Labor Relations Act. There's a missing section there. There's another section 1581 that would need to be added into this amendment. Again, if this is the direction that the committee wants to go in.
And just really quickly on that, because the committee hasn't talked about that at all. That actually came up at lunchtime when I was talking to Sophie. It was a question that was asked of me and I got really confused. So I looked at state statute, and it just seemed, I mean, we have discussed in our committee how specifically SELRA has been the one that has been touched and played with and changed the most. It's a little bit of a hot. So it just would be clarifying and makes sense.
And so this is under the State Labor Relations Act, where there are just 2 different statutory sections. So one talks about decertifying a union, that's 1584, but then there's a reference in 1581 to the showing of interest required if employees no longer want the current representative that they have. So it would just mean changing that showing of interest. Right now, that's 30%, and it would need to be adjusted to the 50% plus 1. So yeah, if there are any questions on that, otherwise, or the memorandum that I was sent to everybody just over a week ago. But yeah, the chair had just asked to. Did you?
I'm just, so those would all be additions, right? All those other
Right, the current one.
municipal employees,
Yes.
early child, those are all additions?
Yeah.
To the bill? Okay, I'm just trying to figure out, we show what's deleted, but we don't show what's added. Evidence.
Yeah, so the State Employee Labor Relations Act, which is section 5A, which is again part of the original bill that came over from the Senate. It was to change the showing of interest from 30% to 50% plus one. And then you would have an election. And because that only impacts the State Employees Labor Relations Act, I was asked to make that same change so it would be consistent through all the Labor Relations Act. So that's what these additional sections, 5C, 5C, 5E, 5F, 5G, 5H would be just adding that same provision in to the other labor relations statutes.
And we by no means are married to that. It was just a conversation. We had asked Sophie to do that, but what the chair has asked me to do is through this discussion, if we have time, to go through three major parts of this portion of the bill. And just take a straw poll where people are at and just have those conversations.
Okay,
That's fine. It's just we wanted to be able to provide some language.
yeah, it seems like a terrible idea to do it in one spot and even worse idea to do it in all of them.
I don't necessarily disagree. I just think if my personal feeling is that if we are going to
Inside the park, oh, sorry, I can't, I would like.
Oh, yeah.
So people can see me.
You're beautiful.
I'm literally right, but see it, look, it's covering me entirely. Like to be seen.
Here, we'll put them here for it.
Thank you.
you.
Sorry, anyway, that.
But yeah, so we can definitely talk
Here.
about that. As we go on, if Sophie, if you wanted to go through the amendment, just if you needed to do more of a walkthrough. Start from there.
So section 5, again, this is the judiciary supervisor. One that would allow judiciary supervisors to organize and collectively bargain. That's unchanged. That's the language that came over from the Senate side. 5A is also the language that came over from the Senate side. This is changing under the State Employees Labor Relations Act, that showing of interest from 30% to 50% plus one. And then you would, if you had a petition that had that, made that showing of interest, then there would be an election. And then this deletes the section that came over from the Senate, which was to do with the certified payroll. There was the conversation around that on state construction projects that would have required contractors, subcontractors to submit weekly records of payroll, that they've signed off on and verified everybody's classified correctly and they've been paid the correct amount. That section has been deleted. And then section.
Who suggested that be deleted? Certified payroll part.
So I think the chair had asked Sophie to just add that just through conversations we've had, but again.
Can Mark wanted that one gone?
Yeah.
Or,
But again, anything is up for discussion. We just wanted to have some language.
That could be added back in if that's what the committee wants to do. And then these are the new sections, 5C. I put them on the chart here just to make it a little easier to go through. So the first one is the Judiciary Employee Labor Relations Act. And that's governed by SELRA Section 941, which is the State Employee Labor Relations Act. So I just added in the word decertification to make it clear that the new decertification provisions in SELRA would apply under JELRA. 5D is the Teachers and Administrators Act. And again, the acts are all written a little bit differently, so these amendments are a little different depending on the statute. But again, this was to try to make clear that, again, if there was a interest in decertifying the current representative, that again, it would be that signatures of 50% plus one on the petition to do that. 5E is the State Labor Relations Act. Again, this has section 1584. If the committee wants to move in this direction, I would want to add section 1581 just to make sure it's consistent, because that references a 30% showing of interest. So it's in two different places and I've only captured it in one. And then section 5F is the municipal employees. And again, this is structured very similar to the State Employee Labor Relations Act. So it's essentially the same structure. So again, just adding in that same language regarding 50% plus one. And then our two quirky, so I like to think of them. This is long because I had a lot of places to change in that one. So 5G is the Independent Direct Support Providers, Labor Relations Act. And again, this refers back to the State Employee Labor Relations Act. So again, it was just a clarification that this would cover both the certification and decertification petitions. And then the final one is the Early Care and Education Providers Labor Relations Act. Again, this would just make clear that it would be, we need to have 50% plus one if you were looking to decertify, and then this retains the July 1, 2025 effective date.
Awesome. Thank you, Sophie. Does anybody have any questions for Sophie?
So judiciary is getting a drive-through of,
They just want to talk about section 5, the judiciary supervisors.
got it, thank you.
Yep, so similar to, they'll have a drive-through. I'm assuming they will take a straw poll, or maybe they'll hear it and say, we really don't need to weigh in. But either way, we will hear back from them on their thoughts on this portion. And then, just like any other time, we'll take that into consideration as we discuss the bill.
They're also taking testimony as well. Yes, and it'll be similar to the testimony that you've already received. Yes.
I do believe that is correct.
Yeah, that's a piece in the bill I really feel passionately about and would like to have it remain.
Mhm.
So as we continue to do markup and drafting, I feel very strong about that piece.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
one of the memo that I sent out last week, one of the questions was generated, I think, by the testimony regarding the judiciary supervisors and sort of what the precedent for that is. And again, there is no Vermont Labor Relations Board cases or Vermont Supreme Court cases talking about judiciary supervisors. So there's nothing here, given the similarity between the Judiciary Employee Labor Relations Act and the State Employee Labor Relations Act. I would anticipate that the Labor Relations Board would look at their decisions under SELRA in making any determinations. And there was a case, a Vermont Labor Relations Board case that I provided to you that kind of goes through how the Vermont Labor Relations Board does that analysis. It's very different at the federal level. So under the National Labor Relations Act, supervisory employees are not included. They're clearly excluded. And again, the National Labor Relations Act applies to private employers not involved in those involved in interstate commerce. But obviously, at some point, Vermont has gone in a different direction with respect to supervisory employees. So that's just the way that it is. So one of the things that was interesting to me was that in 1977, the legislature removed supervisory employees from the exclusion under the State Employees Labor Relations Act. But then when the Judicial Employees Labor Relations Act was enacted 20 years later, they went ahead and excluded supervisory employees. So again, I don't know why that was done, given supervisory employees had already come out at SELRA, but that was just another piece that I found.
Can you remind us when JELRA was enacted?
It's on 1997.
Okay.
And SELRA, I think, is 1969. It's one of the early ones.
Are there any questions on the walkthrough? The portions that we'll be talking about today and the rest of the week?
We're having a community session after Sophie.
Yeah.
Oh,
You just, if anyone has questions.
well, Sophie's here.
Yeah. Who is our wonderful ledge council, and has all the
A million
answers.
places to go.
Sometimes.
Um, Awesome. Seeing no questions for Sophie, I think we can start. Mary, do you have a question? Oh, no. Okay, sorry. I just thought I saw your hand up. Okay, perfect. So
Thank you.
thank you, Sophie. You are free to stay here as long as you have time, but I know that your schedule this afternoon
I will start packing up,
is a little wacky.
stay for a little bit.
Okay, great. So, since we passed out S-127 last week, really the focus of our week this week will be S-125, this bill. We will probably have to hear, H-461 coming back. Is that one?
It's on the calendar for Thursday.
Okay, perfect. So, and that's because there have been amendments that have been proposed in the Senate, so we'll have to either agree to disagree or take those on. But it is also in appropriations, so this will be our main focus this week is 125. I have a feeling S-127 will probably come back to us at some point this week, just to talk about what's going on in Ways and Means with it. That will have to go to appropriations, I believe, for a drive-by, and then it should be on the floor hopefully next week. So this bill, like I said, is really the focus of our week, and we can start committee discussion. Does anyone have a specific part they want to start with, or can I just go through it kind of from the beginning? So, perfect. So the definitions, that portion is the judiciary, advisory is taking that out of the exemptions. That would be the first part. They're changing. Emily has shared her thoughts on it. Does anyone else have thoughts or concerns that they want to share? We go through this.
Mine,
I forget.
oh, it just seems like it's gonna, what was the case that was shared with us? I think Sophie shared the police
Yes.
case of misclassification of employees. I think that's exactly where that's going, so.
Yeah, so. That was. Um. So, do you remember when you sent that email out? I believe it was last week.
28th of
Okay.
March. Were you asking about the case?
Yes,
Yeah, so that was to do with, public safety, the Department of Public Safety. And the department had looked to transfer, 28 lieutenants, convert them from being supervisory employees, i.e. in the bargaining unit, to being managerial employees, so they would not be covered by, collective bargaining. And the Vermont Labor Relations Board went through and looked, was doing an analysis of whether they were supervisory or managerial employees. So that's why I shared it, because I would assume that would be the similar kind of analysis that the Vermont Labor Relations Board would do with judiciary supervisors as to whether they're supervisors or managers.
Does anyone? Obviously, I've weighed in quite a bit and had a bit on the wall for that as well. Does anyone feel differently about keeping that in there from the Senate?
Me,
is there any other conversation? Are we comfortable taking a straw poll on that portion? We don't need to right now, just this is time for committees. I will just share something that I'm working with the committee. This year, for those who are returning, it's obvious that we have a lot more labor bills than we ever have in the last 2 years. And kind of this common denominator I feel like we're seeing is issues with the VLRB. Not that they are not doing great work, it's just that, like everybody else, they seem to be understaffed. And so Mark and I talked, I will be working over the summer on a bill to maybe hope provide them more support or look at different changes to help them, really help them help us. And so that is something I'll be working with towards, and once I have any language, I'm happy to share it with the committee if anyone feels passionately about that. Just because I feel like there are a lot of issues on our wall that would be best having our focus on the VLRB rather than these individual issues. It's a more broader issue, so happy to share that once I have more information, because I have no idea where that's gonna go, but okay. So not hearing a lot of comments, we're gonna move on to decertification language. So currently, the language as sent over from the Senate, and as my understanding is, when this hit the Senate floor, this was the only part of the bill that had hit the Senate floor, and then the judiciary was a floor amendment, and the certified payroll was a floor amendment.
Yeah, actually, it was.
The other way around.
Yeah, judiciary supervisors was the only one, along with the workers' compensation.
Perfect.
Those were the sections that what came out of Senate Economic Development, and then the floor amendment was the certified payroll and the decertification.
Perfect. So, decertification is just for CELRA in this language. If it helps anybody else visualize it, I still have that timeline up. Yeah,
Sorry, this doesn't have to do with decertification.
that's fine. This committee discussion. Let's chat.
Why are we not considering the bill whose number I can't remember, but which had to do with the University of Vermont employees,
173.
173?
I think we wanted to make sure that we talked about this bill first. I will still,
But wouldn't that be, it seems to fit pretty neatly into this bill.
yeah, I mean, we can definitely talk about it as a committee. I don't feel comfortable making any decisions without the chair present.
I just wonder whether you had any insights about why we took testimony on it and then kind of hit pause on it.
I think it was at the time, my understanding is during that time, they were currently in negotiations and then came to a conclusion. So while I think the issue still stands, I think there was the idea that let's focus our attention somewhere else.
Actually, we were waiting on the Senate housing bill, I think at the time. So there was time to do it, and once the Senate housing bill got here, we're back in. Trying to wait through that. That's the impression.
Sorry to.
No, that's literally what we're here for right now. So what we have here, I have a lot of my personal, this is just me as Ashley Bartley I have a lot of concerns about this language. I have a lot of concerns that last time we talked about this last biennium, that I strongly feel that this education should mirror certification. I understand that why it might not. I think looking at the original language, I definitely took issue with the fact that it is just for CELRA. I think if we are going to be changing labor laws, if we're saying that it will be good for employees, then we should offer that to all employees and not just one statute. So that was my ask, just to see what that language would look like and looking for consistency. I still have concerns, but that's why this is here. Because we were talking to Sophie, what that might look like. So how do people feel about the decertification language, and also changing it so it's consistent for all state statutes? Go ahead.
I think it's wildly protectionist against other organizations who might want to represent those people.
Yeah.
So I haven't thought about it. I have a hard time reconciling the idea that a union is there to basically look to the interests of the employees. I have a hard time reconciling that with making it more difficult for the employees to represent themselves.
Yeah.
And, recognizing there's some disruption when there are other, when these things come up, but that's any other business market and any other market. I think the employees should have the same ability to challenge the status quo they have had. That's me. Support. And it's, can we, just for the purposes of summary and review, I still have questions about the judiciary piece here. I don't have the strong impression that they asked for this or wanted it, or that it's particularly, I'm trying to figure out why it's necessary at all.
Okay.
So,
So it sounds like you might want to take
Like
more testimony on that.
not just enough, no. I do not. Just review and because if it can't be said in a paragraph, it's going to be hard to communicate it anywhere.
Yeah.
So why is this important that we do it right now?
That is what you did there. We are on decert, but there's no rhyme or reason right now, so.
I can give you my impression of summary of the testimony and what it's about. Under the State Employee Labor Relations Act, in the executive branch, supervisory personnel can have organized, and do have bargaining units. Under JELRA, they don't. They are prohibited from organizing. The unions are suggesting that we should let them organize if they want. That doesn't mean they will, and it doesn't mean they would be successful in getting a bargaining unit.
But it would make it consistent.
It would make it consistent with the other one, yes, with that one. Nationally, they're one of the major issues facing when you start creating a bargaining unit is it too small? Is it too big? Are the interests of the people in the bargaining unit kind of similar enough that they can be a bargaining unit, et cetera? And that decision is made in different ways. It's all set out in Sophie's memo, but usually the employer starts off by deciding, and then that's appealed to the Labor Relations Board. And what Sophie provided us was an example of a case where the Labor Relations Board kind of went into it for like 15 pages about whether, I guess it was police lieutenants are they supervisory or managerial? And the reason that's important is if they're managerial, they can't organize. If they're supervisory, they can't. And it's just sort of a question of degree. And if you read that, I read that opinion and it was quite something. It was elaborate. And what it did was the opinion had concluded what had happened was the employer had said, no, they're all management and they can't organize. And the labor union said, no, they're actually not management. They're just supervisors and they can't. And they went into great depth about how much responsibility did these folks have, who decided budget, who decided, it's like 11 pages of discussion and fact finding. And they concluded that they were supervisory and could organize. So I think what the unions are asking for what the unions are asking for is to allow this process to move forward where they could organize, supervisory employees could organize. And as a practical matter, it means that the Labor Relations Board would have to decide, well, who is and who isn't. We heard testimony that from, from the judiciary. That first, the judiciary said, well, there's only 4 people. And those 4 people were people like in accounting, so the head of accounting who kind of ran 2 or 3 other accountants, and people in IT who ran 2 or 3 others. And, oh, by the way, just parenthetically, there's other ways that people can be eliminated from a bargaining unit. If they have confidential information about that would come up in a bargain, like the finances, or if they have access to information like IT, where they get to see everything, then it's confidential employees and they can't organize. So it's not just management or it's not just whether the management or supervisory. So the unions took the position when they testified before us that we don't know how many people. It could be more. It could be up to, I think they said 15 to 20 that could be in it. It just depends on the definition. Terry or Sones was worried that what they were suggesting was they wanted all the managerial people to become unionized. That was not their intent, but their intent is to let the BLRB decide who's what. And that's sort of my understanding of the situation. Yes, Joe. Oh,
Yeah.
I've had my hand up.
I'm sorry.
No, you're good. I think a couple things. What you're asking for is a succinct answer. And
I wasn't succinct.
no, you were. I'm just saying, like, if someone was, I always want to know if I can't explain it to a constituent, how can I vote for something? That's usually how I operate. But for me, it's about, in my experience here in this committee, is about we are the first gate to then allow the Labor Relations Board to decide, but they don't even have that option right now without us making that decision. And it's also what I've seen in my time, both working as a union member and other situations, is that it is easy for management to come in and say something, but it's harder for employees to come in and say why they need something, because it kind of puts them in a difficult position to come in and explain why they feel like they need this next step. It can kind of be a power dynamic. So for a manager to come in and be able to say this or that is easier than for the employees. And we have had employees step up and be able to feel that they could be comfortable to testify, but not always. And so it's kind of, my understanding is that we're kind of the first step to allow them to go through just that process. And they may not even choose to, but there's clearly a barrier when they can't even get to that. So while we can't necessarily always have the testimony directly from the employee who wants to or may not want to, that's up to them. It's often we can have the management come in. So I feel strongly, regardless of, clearly I'm very passionate about unions, as we know. But for me, the part of this that just makes sense is that I don't think that they should have that barrier if they choose to, but right now they do. So I think that that's kind of the first thing that we can do, and or not, and then that's up to others to decide. That's how I feel about when we have these kinds of.
So you finish and then Mary.
Yep, so I just want to know if I'm hearing it correctly. We're looking at making Selra Jowra consistent in terms of what can be done. And the Labor Relations Board has criteria to make that decision as to who's a supervisor and who's a manager in both cases.
Yes, and in fact, if you want to sort of boil the criteria down, I read this whole long opinion. It's actually kind of interesting. I mean, no wonder they're backed up, my God. It's 11 pages long.
Yeah.
Or longer, but I think the feeling is, and actually the attorney for O'Neill, the attorney for the judiciary, kind of testified to this, but if someone is high enough in the operation that they really have kind of management, they're really running the shop. The thought was you can't have them in a union because then it's unfair because of the information they have, et cetera. On the other hand, just because they have some management authority, it's not enough. You know, people who run one area, et cetera, it's not enough. And they have all these criteria for kind of parsing that out. Mary,
Well, first of all, I concur with exactly what Representative Krasno said. And for me, I don't care if it's one person or four people. If they have they should have the right to join a union if they so choose. Management is not going to be mostly in favor of it, but and the employees feel more comfortable going to a union rep with a complaint than going to the manager. I also think that the decertification proposal that Sophie walked us through is good, and I would support it.
Excuse me. Really quickly on that, there's a technical part that was not included that Sophie really briefly discussed because it came up at lunchtime. Let me walk you through that. Okay.
does she want to revise the draft if we move it?
Let's talk in committee discussion and then we can see, because
Okay.
it might not even matter, but. just
Are there other people who would like to comment on the issue? There's three parts to the bill. This is one of them. You know, should the court supervisory personnel have, be able to form a bargaining unit if they want to, and as finally decided by the VLRB? That's the first part. Okay, would anyone else like to comment on that? Yes.
I think that we should, as legislators, be in the business of empowering people. And offering a choice is a first step to empowering people.
Did you guys talk about, I'd like to get to a point where we can take straw polls on these three sections, because I want to know what to do with this bill and what to include and what not to include. Are we at a point where people could raise their hands or not raise their hands on this issue,
On the judiciary.
on the judiciary?
Joe had something to say, and then I have,
No, I'm good.
Oh.
It's,
Really? Sure?
what's that?
You sure?
Yeah, I don't think, I'm guessing I'm not gonna get an answer, so
Okay,
I'm good.
okay.
I had a
Leonora?
clarifying question
Oh,
too.
both
but-
you guys, Leonora, you wanted to, you, go ahead.
I'm good because of my questions about something other than this. I'm happy for a straw poll and I support this.
So I just need to clarify, I am not a specialist. I support unions, I support empowering workers and employees and all of those things. And also, I am not an expert in this field. And so
You're not alone.
I think for me, I just, the clarifying question for me is, if they were allowed to, I think this becomes, it's confusing about the union, the way the unions operate within each other. Does that bargaining unit, do bargaining units only, they can only bargain for them? Well, so here's the thing. How, like, I don't know, like, how many, it gets fun, like, weird for me. I'm gonna try to paint a picture. Stay with me, okay? Shoots and ladders. I know, I'm sorry. But, but so if you have a place of employment that is unionized and they have more than one bargaining unit, those bargaining units are bargaining for their own units
Only their.
and
own-
only their own units.
So like, for example, at the Vermont State Colleges,
Right,
there's, I should know, but I don't. A half dozen bargaining units,
right.
and they have to negotiate a contract with each one.
Right, and so therefore, in theory, with the supervisors being able to have their own bargaining unit, that should not conflict with the employees' bargaining unit. And am I accurate in that understanding?
Well, I will tell you, my opinion, informed by about 2 months of beginning to think about labor. My opinion is, you're right. In other words, remember the counsel, the lawyer, who was the lawyer up on the screen? He was very worried about conflict, and somebody said to him,
He just went
I'm like,
across.
he was just.
he was saying, there's a potential for conflict, and we said, well, what about give them their own bargaining unit? You know, and I think that eliminates it, and there was really, he went on to other issues. I think you're right. I think that that's the point. That
Okay.
managers, excuse me,
Supervisors.
have to have their own bargaining unit.
Yeah, okay, I just wanted to be clear in my understanding, and if I am clear in my understanding, then I am okay to do a straw poll on this. I just wanted to clarify and make sure I was understanding correctly before I made any decisions.
That's my understanding.
Okay. Yeah, would like to talk about this before we do a straw poll. By the way, this is not the final vote. That's the whole point of straw poll. So on just this issue, should we strike supervisors from the prohibition? Should we allow supervisors in the judiciary to organize? How many people would be in favor of that at this point in time?
This one section.
Okay, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Opposed? One.
No, I just don't care.
I think we're rearranging deck chairs until the
That's kind of how I feel.
constitutional amendment passes.
Until, yeah,
And then at that point, I think we should be striking every single one of them.
okay. All right. Second of all,
And it doesn't mean you have to vote for the whole bill,
yeah,
just
Right, we're
the,
going section.
this section.
just a second, let me write this down, so supervisors. Okay, now shall we go to union, the decertification issue? Decertification. Okay, so remember, just to summarize, and hopefully I will give an impartial summary. The question here is, should we make it harder initially to create and to provoke an election to decertify a union? Right now, to decertify a union, it takes signatures of 30%. It's not the union, it's the bargaining unit. Yeah, it takes 30% of the bargaining unit. By the way, in all these elections, it's everybody in the unit, whether they chose to be a member of the union or not, okay? So 30% to
Of
do.
voters,
Of-
voters in the bargaining unit.
Of the voters in the bargaining unit, whether they're union members or not. If they produce 30% right now, then there's an election. Okay? And to decertify the union representing that bargaining unit, it's, majority vote. Okay,
Of members.
of members, I could look it up. I think it's of members. And then, so the proposal in this bill is to just change that to 50%. You need 50% plus one, I guess, to decertify, and then,
No, it's to have an election.
you're right, to have an election, then there's an election. And the elect, and then all the debate, remember the description of what an election is like? You know, sometimes they're in person, sometimes they're often not, and there's, you know, it's just like any other election. And that's the intention of the bill. So let's have discussion. How do people feel about this?
I have to go down to the Senate, but
So you want to give us the
Support.
the quick and dirty? Okay,
I'm fine with the 30%.
what?
I'm fine with 30%.
You don't want to go to 50. Okay,
No, I don't think so.
anybody, in other words, okay, all right. Others, just, you don't have to, we'll get to a vote.
I think there's some confusion.
Yeah, Mary, let me just
I think
clarify.
there's some confusion.
Okay, let's clarify.
I'm sorry.
Current law is 30%. The proposal the unions are making is 50.
To decertify.
Yes.
We want the
50, that's right.
We want the 50.
Yeah, okay. I was obviously not clear. All right. Sorry.
So make it harder to decertify
Yeah,
than.
Right.
Yes.
Certify.
Yeah, right.
Well, I think, and so I think like, I think change the narrative, right? Because I think like that is, the narrative is what's making this challenging for folks. And I don't think it's making it harder to decertify, in my opinion. Like what's making me say yes to this is that it is, one, bringing it in closer to alignment, because if you have to have 30% of the voting members are saying that 50% of the members want this, and there's no documentation of that, I feel better if 50% of the people plus one are just saying that, whereas you're not relying on 30% of people who are claiming they have this, you know, what is the thing they have? The petition, right? Or not petition, but you know, that they are certifying that more than 50%. So I think for me is it squares it out, as opposed to, I mean, I guess, yes, in theory, it would make it more challenging, right? But for me, my lens of why I'm looking through it is not to make it harder for people to decertify, but to square things out and make things more on the up and up. And that's just my perspective. I think if 50% plus one are saying, let's have this election, you still have the election, but at least you know for a fact that it's 50% plus one, instead of relying on the board to take that extra step to have to verify that 50% that wants to do it. That's just the way my brain is following. Sorry. I just brought everyone down the rabbit hole with me.
No,
Okay.
we've taken a lot of testimony, we've had a lot of committee discussion.
Yeah.
So that's what we're doing now.
You know,
So I just want to be clear. So to have an election, it's 50% plus one. It doesn't have to be members. And then to decertify,
no, do you mean to certify a
Here.
union?
So this really briefly. So to certify, to have an election to certify, let's start there. There's two options. You either have to get 30% show interest in signing a petition, and then it's a secret ballot for an election. So then you still, after you hit the 30%, you have to have the election to say yes. Then there's the second option, which is 50% plus one, which is the card check, and no election. So once you get that, so then to decertify currently, it can only happen during an open period. So it couldn't happen whenever. And then you have to get 30% to show interest. And then an election is held. And again, that's when majority is needed to agree to decertify. This bill is saying, once again, to decertify, it only happened during an open period. But then 50% plus one needs to show interest. So sign a petition and then have an election.
of members.
Of anybody covered by the, so Jan,
The members of the bargaining unit, whether they're in the union or not. Except
It's
for,
not apples to apples.
Sorry. Can I just say, I feel like it is, because if you have an election, if you're trying to certify a union, it's everybody.
Here's my member.
Yeah,
I think,
no one's excluded.
okay, there, I don't know if this helps, but it's the way I think about it. I really don't care about the comparing certification and decertification. Because they're very different things. They're different circumstances. They just involve, I don't feel the need to compare them. Certification is when there's no union. And you try the union. So you take a bargaining unit, you propose a bargaining unit to the VLRB, and you give them cards, petitions, and you try to provoke an election to have X union represent you. And it has its own processes, its own procedures. There's no union at that time. So it has, for example, if there is a certification and it's decided for 1 year, you can't mess with that. You can't, and I think it's to allow them time to try to negotiate a contract. Okay, that's certification. It used to be that the only way you could get certification triggered, is the 30% sign a petition. Last year, we created card check, which was basically, it's a way of skipping the election. You don't have to have the election if you can get signatures of 50% plus one of all the members. Remember, it's always all the members of the bargaining unit. So decertification right now is, as I said, for me, it's just a completely different situation. The situation is you've got a union. And so it has an interesting and probably understandable provision, which says you can't do it while they've got a contract in place. It's only during the time leading up to a new contract or, in between contracts that you can decertify. It's just a different situation. You have a union, you have a contract. And then right now you need 30% to trigger an election. And the unions are proposing that we make it 50% to trigger the election. The argument of the unions is, well, let me put it this way. They sort of said this, but I'm speaking for myself. I'll take responsibility for this. There's a lot of kind of pretty heavy-handed stuff going on around the United States where it's part of the union busting strategy is to just decertify as much as as provoke elections again and again. And the unions testified that these elections take a lot of their time and a lot of work, and takes a lot out of them. And it's rather easy to get a 30% petition, particularly if you have all these people who aren't union members voting, and they want to make it harder. I don't think about certification. They just want to make it harder to decertify. And they're saying because they think it's very political very often and very, not capital P political, small p, and that there's outside forces sometimes, even unions that are right-wing unions or fake unions or management-dominated unions, et cetera. It's all part of a very intense national scene right now, which I don't know that we have in Vermont yet, but I guess the feeling is people are worried. So anyway, that's how I look at it. I am not trying to compare them. I think they're under very different circumstances. One of the points that was made here, by our vice chair, was that it's only for SELRA that we're talking about, state employees, and that maybe we should change them all. I'm just raising that, but
Yeah,
Anyway.
we went through that with,
Oh, you went through that with Sophie.
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, that was.
No, I'm
upstairs.
just letting you know, so.
Yeah. So anyway. Is that, so anyway, that's what's at stake here. What are people, please, discussion, what are people feeling about this? Don't talk at once, guys.
I'm in favor of it being equal. Or, to start with and in the middle as far as wanting to form an election and then if to decertify, I don't think it should be different numbers.
So the problem is there's two numbers to certify.
Yep.
30%.
There's the 30% and then the 50%.
Yeah. So when you say you want them to be equal, are you, let's put it this way. Are you in favor of just leaving decertification? Petition to decertify at 30%, or are you in favor of it increasing it to 50%?
Increasing it.
Okay. Others want to just check in here, what you're thinking? Before I ask for a straw poll, yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think that the fact that, you know, you've got to include the votes of a lot of the people who are not members, who are not union members. It should be a bigger number to decertify.
Comments,
Why 50?
as opposed, it's 50 plus one. Yeah.
40.
Well, because it's a majority.
Well, then
Yeah.
just have the election.
No, then you have the election, yeah.
Well, that's what
I think, it's
what
just,
we're saying.
I don't think there's any why, it's just there, yeah, I mean, if, you know, yeah, it's just.
If 50 plus one vote to have the conversation, you're obviously in trouble. So 30% are not pretending to represent 50. They're simply saying 30% of us want to have the conversation.
Yeah, I was just referring to the language that was, I realized it was stricken out.
And
So the original language, that's why I had to go back and look, where it says, or that the individual, the employee organization currently certified as the bargaining agent is no longer supported by at least 51% of the employees in the bargaining unit. So that part that's what I was focusing on. So that's where that came from. Out, so.
If an employee is dissatisfied with their union, I don't picture that being any more comfortable for them to bring up than to go to the management and bring up the dissatisfaction with the management.
You,
I mean, this is.
say that again?
If an employee has an issue and they're uncomfortable going to the management with it, I can understand, but I can also understand that if an employee has an issue with their union, they're not necessarily comfortable bringing it up either. So I think the threshold is, I think it's important that they have the opportunity to have the conversation. If 30 is too low, I think 50 is too high. I don't think it'll happen.
Others?
I think it should be raised to 50 plus one. And I think that it's, like the 30, is the reason that the 30 is of the whole organization is because the union doesn't yet exist. And then so that they can have a low threshold to even have a conversation about it. But once the organization does exist, then it should be, in my opinion, it should be only the members who can call for it to be decertified. And also that it should be 50 plus one within the organization. Because it's their deal.
Others? Opinions? Other people wish to express opinions? Yes, madam.
Can I ask how people would feel about changing this for Delra, for all of them?
Yeah.
I agree.
I think it makes a lot
I
of
agree, it should be
sense.
consistent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think personally for me, my concern hasn't changed 2 years. It's all about consistency to me. And while I understand that it isn't necessarily apples to apples, consistency is always going to be important to me. And I already think it is more difficult to decertify because you can only do it during the open period. I personally would love to see it be option 1, not option 2. Just like certification. That's me personally,
You mean, you could do it by card check.
yeah. I have no problem with that. If we're saying card check is good enough to certify a union, I think we should say card check is good enough to decertify a union. In this nation, we have the right of freedom of association. I think we should also have a right of freedom of disassociation. Somebody with an R next to my name, I take that very seriously with this administration. That's my opinion. I would appreciate seeing that change that Sophie has made.
Oh, was it to this one?
Yes,
Okay.
I got a question
Yeah.
though. So, if there is a bargaining unit that has only 4 members, and we keep 30% decertification,
I think they would say it's gotta be 2.
I thought,
If it only had 4. In other words, it would be 30, you couldn't have it be one person signing it.
right,
That would be 25, so you can't split people into various pieces of their body, so I'd say it would be 2.
exactly. I saw your hands goes up, so your fingers go up, sorry.
I had missed, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, and I don't need to interject myself in the proceedings if you would prefer me to. I agree with your analysis. Under the current language, I think decertification will require
2
2,
votes.
and I think under the proposal will require 5.
Yeah,
Is it, sorry to go back to the first thing that the first change, in the bill, the first measure in the bill. Does the labor board allow 4 people as a bargaining in?
I don't know whether they ever have or haven't. I mean, it's.
I thought
they
that
have-
part of the criteria
The
was
criteria is it can't be
you can't be too
fragmented, you
small of a
can't be,
number,
well,
or,
it
says-
can't be, it has to be functional, it can't be fragmentary.
okay.
It can't fragment the work. I think they would, for example, ask, how many bargaining units are there for this organization, you know?
Mhm.
They don't want there to be too many bargaining units. You know, I don't know. I have a feeling there's some bottom threshold as a practical matter. I think, for example, with do you remember the judiciary? The judiciary itself argued that there were only 4
Right.
employees.
And then,
And maybe 2 of them might have confidential information. And so, you know, I think it'd be if that's really true, but the union argued, hey, it could be a lot more.
right,
I don't know if there's what the history of certification is. Well, I'll tell you what I'd like to do. I've written down, there are several different modifications that I'm hearing people. But what I think, and I'm going to list them in a minute, but I think I want to start off by just saying, if we were just faced with the bill as is right now, how many people would vote yes to this part, the decertification? In other words, if we're faced with 50%, not 40, 50 plus 1, not all of whatever, not card check to decertify, not only members, etc. Just this bill, how many would vote yes?
For the whole bill or just the section?
This section. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7,
8.
8. Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
No guessing. No, there's no guess.
Okay,
I feel very confident that I can speak
using
for
our
her.
imagination,
okay,
yeah.
all right. Now, I do want to ask, I just want to run this by. First of all, and you were a no?
I won't vote for it if it's not all of them.
Okay, that was my question. If it's all of them, would you vote for it?
Probably.
Okay. If it was 40%, would you vote for it?
If it was all of them.
If it was, it would have to be
Yeah,
all of
just-
them. If it was all of them, you would vote for it?
At 40%.
At 40, 40 and all of
40
them.
and all.
Okay, all right, that's good. This is exactly what we need to do, guys. All right, okay,
I'm not.
all right. So let's. One here. Oh. Did, when Sophie was here, did she talk about how difficult it would be to make all of them? She did.
She
No,
didn't make it, she didn't make it sound very difficult.
yeah, she didn't make it sound very difficult. I think so. The biggest thing is I actually got a question earlier this morning from somebody outside of the building. And it ended up in us squabbling a little bit about where this is in state statute. And I had questions and they were arguing that it should be in 1581, not 1584. And Sophie and I during lunch sat down, looked at the green book, and there's a portion in 1581 that mentions the 30% for decertification. So
We'd have
that,
to- she'd
she
have
would
to
just have to fix that.
Okay.
But she's gone through,
Yeah, she's found all.
she's found where the
Yeah.
act, where the statutes would have to be
I'm
changed for
sure
all the
she'll
other
do.
groups.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, okay, I'll tell you. Now let's move on. If it's okay, can we move on?
Can I just ask a really quick question?
Go ahead, please. We
It's
need that
actually
time.
for people in the room, not at this table, because I don't know the answer, and I wish I had thought of it before today. Does the VLRB have any sort of interaction during decertification, or is it just the bargaining unit and the union?
It looks, first of all, it seems like you're looking at me, Madam Vice Chair.
Sorry,
I was just.
you're usually my
Just
go.
fine, I'm happy to respond. I just want to make sure I understand your question. You're saying does.
Can you
in
just
a
give your name
decertification-
for the record?
Yes, of course, Tom Abdul, legislative coordinator for Vermont State Employees Association. I think your question, Madam Vice Chair, is is a decertification election when it occurs run through the VLR?
Yeah.
The answer is yes.
Okay.
The VLRB runs a decertification election. They tally the results and they control that process.
Thank you.
Also, that's one, and that's an important difference between certification and decertification. Because with certification, when you walk into the VLRB with a certain number of signatures, the VLRB, there's no bargaining unit. It doesn't exist. And so what you're trying, the VLRB initially gets involved and has to make a decision as to who's in the bargaining unit, and are they manager, are they, et cetera. And they do all that. And then do you have the number of signatures you need, et cetera? Okay,
That's actually very helpful. And I am more, now knowing that I am more willing to support this, as long as it's for all of them.
okay. Such a hard bargain, God, tough as nails. Okay,
Please know
Now-
what it is.
let's talk about certified payroll. That's the third piece, okay? So what we're talking about, and I'll try to just set the stage here and the testimony that we heard, et cetera. The proposal is, there is for federal contracts that are large, fairly large, not very, really large contracts. There's an act called the Davis-Bacon Act, which applies. And the Davis-Bacon Act requires prevailing wage, which is set regionally. And then every contractor and all of their subcontractors has to file a form weekly. It's a weekly payroll. That's now the existing law for federal, when federal money is involved. The agency of the state that does this routinely is the Agency of Transportation. Okay? They didn't testify to us, but they do it. Okay. This bill proposes that a similar, very similar requirement exists for state construction contracts over $100,000. There's a wrinkle on that, but let's just say over 100,000. The $100,000 applies to the primary contractor. So if I'm a primary contractor to do a building for the state, this bill would require, well, law already requires that I pay prevailing wage, and let's say Tom is one of my many subcontractors. He has to pay prevailing wage. That's current law. This bill would say that I and Tom have to essentially do what they do under Davis-Bacon, fill out a weekly payroll slip. And we've had copies of what's used in other states. I will do my best to summarize the testimony.
Excuse me, I'm so sorry.
I haven't even gotten there yet.
But this is the stuff I live for, so
Okay, well, you're gonna interrupt me or supplement what I say.
probably.
Yeah, okay. There was testimony that there are situations where employees are not paid prevailing wage, or they're not paid the correct wage. They're misclassified or they perhaps are being treated as independent contractors when they ain't. They're being treated in the wrong category. They're not being paid prevailing wage. The argument is that this record keeping will help enforcement. Also, this record keeping that the act of requiring that everybody, all of the subcontractors fill it out will increase voluntary compliance. You know, if you know you have to fill out a form, you'll do better. You'll be more likely to do better. Okay. We heard a lot of testimony from state agencies saying that this was a record-keeping burden. The agency, the building, what's it called? BGS, Building and General Services, testified that getting all of these reports every week and having to keep records about them, having to produce them if there was, let's say, a labor union were to ask for make a Public Records Act, would be a huge effort, and that she estimated that they would have to hire 4 new people to do that. We also heard from the Department of Labor, which was sort of similar in its saying this would be a big thing. We heard from a contractor, a rather large contractor, a woman who does this for the large contractor for Davis-Bacon. And she testified that it's a pain, that it's just a lot of work to do, and that she thought that smaller contractors, you know, they had a full-time person to do it, but that a smaller contractor would find that burdensome, and that they were worried that smaller contractors would not join bids working for the state because it's too much hassle. They just wouldn't do it because of the paperwork. And so then, and I asked, how are things enforced now? My impression is the way things are enforced now is there is this group in the Department of Labor called the Wages and Hours Group. And it's, I think, for employees. And they, if someone feels they are not being, or I guess if a union feels they are not being paid right, or they're being misclassified, they can complain to the Wages and Hours Division. And the Wages and Hours Division has access to their payroll and can go to the employer and get that information. And they can penalize the employer, or they can, what they probably do is they talk to the employer and say, you gotta change what you're doing and make back pay or whatever. I asked, is this happen a lot? And they sent an email which enumerated how many complaints they got. All I can say is the answer was not very many. That could cut either way. People don't know their rights or whatever. If this bill became law in this area, then the process would be the same with one exception. Let's say I feel like I've been misclassified, I would complain to Wages and Hours. They would investigate. In addition to whatever access to whatever documents they had now, my employment records, the employer's records, they would have all of these weekly statements in addition. What have I left out?
I think that's the gist of what we've heard.
There it is. There it is. And oh yes, it's the law in most of New
I was
England.
gonna say.
In most of New England. But not here and not New Hampshire. What have I left? I think that's about it. I have opinions, which I have not tried. I have tried desperately not to express. Mary, then Tom.
I think Lenora had her.
Oh, was Lenora number one? I'm sorry.
It's number one.
I'll take it. I'll take it.
Certification.
No,
What?
we're on certified payroll.
Certified payroll. Oh, by the way, just so you know, on decertification, there was a really heavy negotiation.
Really?
Yes, the vote
I
was.
also voted for you because I knew what your answer was. so-
Yeah. Straw poll, straw poll.
Voted for you.
I was a great proxy.
But anyway, it's
We
eight,
questioned
eight in
it,
favor plus one if we did all of the labor.
And 40%, not 50.
Yeah, and then two, if we did 40% rather than
I
50.
thought that was for one.
But
You're the
I
one.
did ask how many would vote for it
And you-
now, and it's.
Oh, and 40.
I would.
Yeah, I know. we
Oh,
wanted it.
okay. Yeah, thank you. I was making sure one of our other bills passed another committee. and
It did?
Yes,
Which-
unanimous
which?
appropriation.
127?
What? How did you do that?
I don't know.
127?
The flowering, the unpaid leave.
Did you break?
Oh, on paper.
Anyway,
So-
sorry, back.
Oh,
Thank
Okay,
you.
so now to the floor, right?
Now to the floor.
Right.
Well, and we have to concur
Well, I don't know.
or not.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So I think the fact that, are we allowed to give opinions now?
Yeah.
I think that the fact that
Either way.
I'm of two minds, to be honest, because it seems like we haven't managed to flesh out how to not make this an unfunded mandate, because we don't have a clear sense of like how the record keeping will work, who's in charge of keeping what. I'm a little concerned about the privacy repercussions of that, just that. I don't think that it's insurmountable, but I think that we would need to keep talking about it before I could vote for it. But I also think that it's more of a burden on the state than it is on the contractors, because I think that the contractors, it's proportional. If you're a little contractor, you're not gonna have to do that much work. You're gonna have a couple, you might not have that many, you won't, if you're small, by definition, you don't have that many employees. And my thinking for the logic behind this is that if you're a small contractor, maybe that's where more of the errors, honest errors might be happening. And so this might be really useful for larger contractors. They, it could uncover really, really egregious errors. And they have the staffing probably and the wherewithal to actually track this stuff better. So, or keep the records better. So those are my two thoughts.
So.
I have a feeling you've had some lived, what do we call it? Lived experience.
That's what they're used to calling it these days.
Okay, we'll call it that. So I'm trying to think of a simpler way to alleviate the concern that drives this, and it is very conceivable that a subcontractor will submit a proposal based on prevailing wage, but not pay it. They're pocketing the difference. So that's the abuse we want to not happen, or if they just, or they've submitted the low bid and that's how they did it. Okay,
Oh, I see. You mean
so there is
they
a
float their
possibility.
bid based on not paying prevailing wage.
Well,
But
two
it doesn't show up,
situations, two situations might happen. They might have submitted a bid and based their estimate on not prevailing wage, and therefore they had the lower bid and they got the job. They also might submit a bid basing their labor on prevailing wage
And pocket
the difference, not pay it. So there are potential problems with not being able to verify. When I get, somewhat reluctantly now, when I get involved with projects with state funding somewhere in the stack, there are, I have to submit certificate of insurance, which I do with commercial insurance. I do that with customers anyways. I have to submit a certificate that indicates that I have workman's comp, that the employees are covered, under workman's comp. If I'm thinking that, and either the contract should specify that I am paying prevailing wage and this is what it is, or an affidavit of some sort, say there's some sort of documentation that's provided up front. If somebody believes if an employee believes they're not getting that pay, all they need is their pay stubs to demonstrate that. We don't need weekly paperwork. If they have their pay stubs, it'll be obvious enough between the contract that I've already filed with the general contractor or affidavit or whatever paperwork that I've certified. So that way I've certified it once and I can be held to it at any. That's simpler than having to.
Let me just see, are you suggesting, I don't understand, you're saying you think that the contract, the law should specify that the contract between the general contractor and all subcontractor has to specify
prevailing wage if it's required.
I don't know if it does already or not.
I haven't been.
We can find
I haven't been asked. There's one or two projects that I keep asking about it. And they say, no, I don't know.
Well, let me ask you, do you know? Let's take your situations. Let's say someone doesn't pay prevailing wage, and that would be apparent from the pay stubs.
Well, if there's
Or would there
already,
be arguments, well, he didn't work as many hours, or I don't know.
but yeah, hourly should be on the pay stub.
Yeah,
And the number of hours should be on the pay stub.
okay, so you would know you'd know the wage.
Yeah, now I guess if you paid them with a paper check, that might be,
I've gotten some of those.
handwritten paper check sort of thing might not indicate.
Okay.
But you still have.
Well, that's different, that's wrong. Yeah.
But you still have to do accounting at the end of the year where it's gonna show that you had employees.
Yeah, but not all your contracts are government contracts or at prevailing wage.
But if they are, right now, if it's a government contract, that's a
Yes.
state contract.
If it's a state contract, yeah, it has to be, and there's some threshold. There's one that's a historic preservation grant, one of my projects, and there's no The insurances and all that are tied to, I have to certify that. But there's no question of prevailing wage in that case. Other ones, which is a housing project, I have not heard directly. I mean, I've asked a couple of times, so. If I was, and I think if I was directly working for the state, it would be a little more obvious. But I don't have if I know I need to pay prevailing wage, and I know it ahead of time, I can build that into the proposal, and I don't have a problem
Just go
paying
into the bit. How do you feel about the paperwork?
it.
Seriously, no. Well, I mean, I know that, I understand you, let me put it another way.
Sure.
I know, of course, who likes it. I'm asking, is it a burden?
Weekly, yeah, it's one more thing, because it's not the only thing you have to keep track of when you're a small contractor. There are a lot of details, and it's not till you have 10 or more employees, at least in, the work that I do, you gotta have 10 or more full-time employees before you have enough overhead income to hire
pay
an
a
accountant, even a part-time payroll person.
Right.
So it is one more thing on top of, this withholding and that, payroll deduction and this insurance and the number of things. It's one more detail on top of a stack that's already there. And weekly, I do payroll every 2 weeks. And I'm always like, oh my God, payroll tomorrow. I can't imagine doing it weekly. It would cost me, if it cost me half a day a week, it would run better than $12,000 worth of unbillable time a year. I mean, it's not gonna take half a day to do this one piece of paperwork, but the sum total of all of the different payroll things I try to remember to keep track of. So they're just looking for a simpler way to address a real problem.
Well, I think one
Oh, Mary.
thing we should find out. We should find out what the contractual obligation is. Yeah, Mary,
I agree with that, but also, the Department of Transportation does this already.
they do it already. Yeah,
And most of New England does it already. And we're a small
We're just,
state. And what's
Department of Transportation.
one more,
Staff.
what's one more? It's like doing your expense. What's one more piece of paper? To make sure that someone is getting paid properly. I mean, you might have an employee that wouldn't dare mention anything for fear of losing his or her job. Like, I'm not getting paid enough. I don't know.
yeah.
I'm just wondering how it actually, with the Department of Labor, I mean, because one of the first things that shocked me about being a legislator was getting emails from people who are like, I've been waiting weeks just to hear back from the Department of Labor. I've been, or I'm not gonna get, like, I'm going through my savings so quickly that I'm leaving this, I have to
Oh,
leave
I've
the
gotten
state.
those on unemployment insurance.
Exactly.
Right, yeah.
So my concern is adding more without putting funding in or, having staff money for software, whatever it's gonna, like, that's what it would take for me. Cause I just, the last thing I want is for people who are, like, if you're getting paid 25 cents less an hour, is for me in terms of like, you're not getting your unemployment insurance, like, I need to know that we're not taking away resources, but rather helping workers, you know what I mean?
Huh.
If that makes
This goes
sense.
back to what we've been talking.
In fact,
you're next.
that's probably a bill that we should, like, we should try to
Well,
figure out.
actually, that's exactly a possibility. Yeah, you were. Go ahead.
We'd also include Department of Labor in that VLRB.
Yeah.
But so I have a lot of thoughts on this. I
Share them all.
I'm trying to categorize in my mind. I think I understand the intent. I think unfortunately, no matter what we legislate, there's always going to be bad actors. No matter what, even if we put every single guardrail, there's going to be bad actors. And there's gonna be people who are paying at the table and not paying taxes. Like, that's just reality.
And they're not gonna write that on their weekly report.
Exactly. And I think I also would say that there is a mutual responsibility between the employer and the employee to ensure that somebody gets paid correctly. I can say, anytime and I hate payroll with a passion, I will never work another job where I have to do payroll, maybe review it, but I will never enter in payroll. Because it's, you have to be meticulous, it takes all day, it's not just something where you're like, check, they're great, even working with an automated system where somebody punches in and punches out. It is still a huge task.
That's why people outsource it and pay for it through the nose.
Yes, and so I think, but I can honestly say that anytime there's been an issue with somebody's paycheck, anytime I've experienced that, it's been on the employee who has made a mistake. And then at that point, it is the employer's responsibility. And if the employer makes a mistake, it is the employer's responsibility to say, yes, we are going to fix that. I think right now, one of my biggest concerns when I first got this was, does the Department of Labor have this capacity? I don't think they do. They've testified they don't have the capacity. It's an unfunded mandate. I'm concerned about the population that may or may not be holding public records requests on. I think, yes, we've had testimony that, you know, if you have a license in an industry, you're already on some sort of documentation. You don't need a license to drywall. There's a lot of things that people are doing in these projects that you don't have to have a license for. So I don't find that argument well taken. And it's a huge concern that I have right now.
Privacy
Privacy and
and various issues with
Yes.
the current regime, yes.
And then I would also, I do understand that other states in New England do this. However, I think we need to look at what their tax capacity is versus ours, and they have a much larger tax base than we do. And so I don't know it. We've heard from the Department of Labor, they don't have the capacity. I don't think our small contractors have the capacity, because if you're a small contractor, please don't take offense to anything I'm about to say. You're running to the store, you're doing the work yourself. You're not just a small contractor. You don't, even if you own the business, you don't get the luxury of sitting in your office all day. You're out breaking your back, sweating. You have to be there for your employees. You have to, it's not just one check on the documentation. And I'm really concerned about our small contractors. We are in the housing crisis. I do think that we would lose several small contractors' willingness to bid on projects.
Can I ask a point of clarity?
Yeah.
I thought it's not with the Department of Labor. I thought it was whoever administers the contract.
So the Department of Labor would be the ones receiving the certified payroll, was my understanding. Who would be receiving it then? Do you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, we would be reviewing.
The awarding agency, the Department of Labor, but it has to be the record.
Like BGS, for example.
Correct, it says.
It's the awarding agency.
Exactly, it says
Okay.
the record shall be available for inspection by the Commissioner of Labor at any reasonable time upon request.
Okay, go on.
Okay.
Thank you, David. Yes, go on.
I still don't think that answers any of my other concerns. I'm glad that I have that point of clarity myself. But I think where there are issues in this already, it is being addressed. And I'm not supportive of this aspect of the bill at all.
Other thoughts, people's reactions? Anybody want to say anything? I'm, for myself, unpersuaded on this one. First of all, I'm very aware that other states in New England are doing it. I understand that. And regretfully, I kind of don't think our bureaucracy is up to the job at the moment. They don't have independent I mean, the AG's office, they had the AG and they dropped the AG out. We could put the AG back in, but frankly, I'm just not sure the AG has the will or given my experience, every time I think about a state agency here, they're busy telling me they can't do it because they don't have the authority, they don't have the people, they don't, et cetera. But for me, I don't doubt that if there was payroll, certified payroll, filling out that form might eliminate some fraud. You know, people feel like, oh God, I better, do it. But I'm not persuaded very much. The thing that gets to me mostly is, I'm just not sure after all this paperwork. I'm not gonna take into account too much the building and general services saying they need 4 new people. I think that was off the cuff, but I feel like what's bothering me is the comparison between what happens now and what would happen if we required all this paper. What happens now is an employee who has to complain, or a labor union, and they go to wages and hours and they investigate it, they have access to the information they need, and they tell the employer to change what they're doing. What would happen after all this payroll is exactly the same thing. The difference is that I think the records would be a little better, but I'm not persuaded enough better. I do wonder, and I'm just speaking for myself, whether this isn't okay, that's my personal opinion on this. Speaking as chair, one of the things that we've been talking about here are sort of some, as we hear all this labor testimony on these different bills, there are certain themes that are coming out that I kind of think next session we have to get into a little more. One of them is, for example, that the Vermont Labor Relations Board is just non-functional, but because they are so understaffed, there are these huge delays. And the question is, can we hold hearings on that? And could we initiate a bill where we address that issue? I just had a discussion with the chair of appropriations because I was kind of, lobbying is a little strong word. I was kind of contending to her that she should seriously consider the 2 positions that were in the Senate budget for DOL. And she was contending back that she was just, she was turning into miscut everything because there wasn't enough money. And she didn't see that. And I said to her, well, I'll tell you, you got to do what you got to do. But I think next year you might see from us a more systemic approach with appropriations in it, since the VLRB doesn't seem to advocate for itself. And she said, that's exactly what I would like you to do. In other words, a more systemic approach. And I'm wondering whether this isn't something the certified payroll isn't something we ought to look into as well. Looking at whether there are less burdensome alternatives, whether dealing with the public records problem, and is there a way to anonymize the information so certain things like name and address are not susceptible to public records requests? And is there, do we in our own independent sense think that somebody needs another position at the state to enforce this? Those are what I'm thinking out loud. Yes.
So I was just trying to summarize kind of where you're going. It sounds like this section you feel could use some more time and clarity, think more about how we can support different aspects and agencies to make sure that this goes smoothly, but the other 2 pieces of the bill to stay and to kind of give this one a little bit more time.
Is
that the direction that you're kind of,
that's kind of
without persuading anyone, that's kind of
right, but
my analysis of what's happening.
Right. Yes,
I
that's kind of.
I
where
will
I'm-
say where I am, for the record, I do support the bill as my proxy stated, but will support the bill. If that's how the committee ends up, but with the intent that this is a to be continued conversation.
What is, well, I do want to ask now, just to clarify, who would vote for certified payroll as in this bill now?
Well, now, isn't it deleted? No.
No, we haven't deleted it. I'm just saying
So
before.
as it came from the Senate,
Oh,
so
oh, oh,
ignored workers' comp, and
okay.
just as the judiciary, decert, and then certified.
No, but he's just asking
No,
about.
I'm
No,
just-
no, I'm saying
Payroll.
though, but at that point.
I'm just asking, yeah, I'm asking, like I asked on the other two supervisors
Right.
and on decertification, now I'm on the third one,
Okay.
which is certified payroll. You know, that weekly thing, and I'm just asking for a straw poll, who's in favor of it as it stands now in the bill? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Who's not? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Joe the tie.
Joe, I know.
Once again, I can provide Joe. with-
Yeah, all right.
Okay. Okay.
But
I think so.
okay.
So I
I
wanna,
am okay with, I'm not gonna,
right,
So,
okay,
okay.
so what I wanna do is, but we can't vote now because we've got to talk to Sophie. Because what I think I'd like to do, if it's all right with the committee, is I'd like to tell Sophie to, number one, this got to tweak with
Yeah.
some things, and number two, to write it so that the decertification section is applicable to all the statutes.
sounds like you're
Appreciate
going to
that.
conference.
Yeah, well, I think that will happen anywhere, and it's quite possible, who knows what will happen at
Everything.
conference, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that was very helpful.
No, I just had a question around that, the payroll portion.
Yeah, the certified payroll, yeah.
Yeah. So similarly to. Similarly to when I'm gonna shift
Yeah,
subjects,
go ahead,
but just to make like a reference and
we have time.
and see if I'm off the radar or not. So similarly to when we were trying to do the registry. For housing, yes,
The
right,
rental registry,
right, yeah.
and we found a substitute sort of.
right. So I'm wondering if something similar could take place, like is like maybe there's an avenue that is being missed here where what we were ultimately trying to get from the rental registry we found could be obtained in an alternative route. Similarly, could what would be obtained through the certified payroll? We're saying people submit paperwork, contracted, like there's.
Anyway,
Yeah,
yeah.
right. So how can is there an alternative route to get to the same ending?
I think that's a really interesting observation and one we're pursuing. I mean, to be clear, I think the unions quite understandably, right now, they just simply took Davis-Bacon and the legislation in other states, and this is what this is. And I think if we want to go for another model, we can look at that, but we do have to be aware, we're not doing that model at this time. So, yeah, I mean, I think it may be, I almost feel like what we ought to do is have in here somebody who's very familiar with what contractors, exactly what their paperwork is.
Yeah, what?
And what they already do. Yeah, what they already do. And ask ourselves, is that sufficient, or is there something more that could be added that isn't much? That is like, right, for example, I'm just throwing this out. maybe the answer is whatever we do, it's not every week, it's every 2 weeks. Or concurrent with payroll or something. I just don't know. Yes.
Took the words right out of my mouth. I was gonna ask Tom if, in your opinion, in your experience, if you had to fill out a piece of paper on the days you're doing payroll, and whether that's an institution that does it every other week or semi-monthly, do you think that that would be an easier pill to swallow? I mean, no matter what, I think paperwork will.
I mean, see the
continue.
I don't know about swallowing a pill.
Yeah.
The difference between a tennis ball and a golf ball.
Yeah.
I was shooting it down.
Oh, I see.
For that.
But I mean- That. We are gonna take a break.
It's really wild,
I
but.
could go for a break.
Okay,
Yes.
how long have you got?
The rest of the afternoon.
Don't say that.